Hello, I'm Linda. I'm very lucky to be one of the librarians working across all Kirklees libraries. Now today, I'd like to say welcome not only to our LAL viewers, but also to our viewers watching this as part of the 2021 Cosmia Festival. And here's Dave, the director of the festival, with a short introduction for those viewers.
Hi and welcome to this Cosmia Festival 2021 event brought to you in partnership with Kirklees Libraries. You can find details on the rest of the programme by visiting our website, which is cosmiafestival.co.uk, or by finding us on social media where we're Cosmia Festival basically everywhere. If you want to support the festival further, we have our Ko-Fi link which helps fund future editions like 2022, where we should have a full programme and be back in person, fingers crossed. But for now, stay safe, enjoy the show, and we'll see you very soon.
Now, as always, if you missed any of our wonderful LAL sessions, you can catch up on our YouTube channel, our Facebook, and on our Twitter. Or you can catch up here on our website, which is kirkleeslibraries.co.uk/LAL, where you'll not only find the ones that we've already done before, but you'll find the forthcoming sessions as well. Now, if you missed any of the Cosmia sessions, which started on Saturday, you can catch up here, different banner, and that's at www.cosmiafestival.co.uk, and it's Cosmia. If you just go to the /what's on, that will give you the page straight away as to all the things that are happening through the Cosmia Festival. Now, our lovely friends at Reed Bookshop in Home Firth are offering 20% discount on all of the books featured in the Cosmia Festival. Now, I'll tell you all about that at the end of the broadcast. I'm so happy today to be talking to Phil Hickes. If you have any questions for Phil, please type them into the chat box and I'll be able to ask them as we go along. Born in the UK, Phil now lives with his wife in Portland, Oregon. Phil graduated with an English literature degree from Middlesex University and currently works as an advertising copywriter. He has a passion for horror, ghosts, and all things that go bump in the night, which led him to do a fiction writing course with the horror author Jeremy C. Shipp. Now, his first story was featured in an adult horror anthology, and he's since had several short stories published in anthologies in the adult genre. But he turned his hand to writing middle grade as he wanted to create the same visceral thrill that he remembers reading when he was a child, when he read Alan Garner, Clive King, and Roald Dahl. Phil's books are a perfect combination of local folklore and spine-tingling scariness, which is just perfect for this time of year. Both books are so spine-tinglingly brilliant, and the illustrations are simply stunning. And I would recommend them to any teachers out there, teachers of year 5-6, as they are a really good model for suspense and horror writing. With that, I'd like to welcome Phil into the studio. Hi, Phil. So it's good afternoon from me and a good morning to you.
Yeah, good afternoon, Linda, and yeah, good morning from me.
Thank you so much. I know it's very, very early for you, so thank you for making this session possible for us.
It's a pleasure.
All the way from Portland, Oregon. Now, the first question you must have been asked over and over again, because it's the first thing that we find out if we see anything about Phil Hickes, is that I read as a child you lived in a house overlooking a churchyard. So can you tell us a bit about that? And is it what sparked your interest in spooky stories?
I can tell you more about that. I was born in Rochdale on the edge of the Pennine Hills, which I think you know, Linda. And
I do.
You know, it's quite a bleak part of the world, you know, particularly in winter. And my father was a Church of England vicar, and the vicarage overlooked the graveyard of the church, and the front of the graveyard that the public would walk past was all very tidy and well kept, but behind it was, you know, this it was overgrown and crumbling. They had, you know, a grave of a soldier that had fought at the Battle of Waterloo, and all the tree roots were snaking through these crumbling mausoleums. And you know, I used to play in there during the day and climb the trees, and it was great fun. But at night, you know, it took on an altogether different atmosphere, and I would stare out of my bedroom window and wonder if, you know, all the residents were truly at rest. And you know, when I've been asked about why I'm interested so much in horror and ghosts, I can't help but, you know, trace it back to that. And, you know, the fear, the mixture of fear and excitement I used to experience as a child, I think was definitely a formative influence on what became my obsession in both, you know, books and films. You know, the vicarage was incredibly cold. We all used to huddle around the Aga in the kitchen. It was the only warm room in the house, and you know, it just seems so evocative now when I think back on it. And yes, so I think that's where all this trouble stems from.
I can identify with that. I was brought up in a drafty farmhouse, and I remember huddling around a little electric fire trying to get warm before we went to school. And yes, those bleak moors and those bleak stories that we can tell from being children, they do have an effect on us as we get older. When I was a little girl, lived in the farmhouse, there was a ghost in our farmhouse called Edgar, and Edgar hadn't wanted to leave the farm. He wanted to die there, but his wife had talked him into going nearer to the coast where it was going to be warmer and better for his health. And he said he didn't want to leave the farm. So after he died, he came back, and we could smell his pipe, and we did actually see him as well, but he was no trouble.
Ooh,
so do you,
my neck tingling.
do you believe in the supernatural? Have you ever seen a ghost or experienced anything that's otherworldly? Have you got any ghost stories?
I'm a firm believer in the supernatural. I think, you know, obviously a lot of ghost sightings can be attributed to, you know, natural phenomena that, you know, we perhaps don't understand. But, you know, we've got thousands of years. I think the first ghost story is, you know, back in Roman times or Greek times. It's something like that. So we have, you know, millennia of ghost stories. And I think even if you put a huge chunk of those to one side as being attributable to some kind of natural phenomena, it leaves a huge amount of unexplained stories still. And myself, I've seen a vase fly off a table, even though nobody was around it. And I've heard footsteps. The place where we live currently, it used to be a campground, you know, about 100 years ago. You can still see some of the numbers on the trees where they would try and find their campsites. And it does feel at times infused with a certain sort of latent energy. And, you know, I've heard footsteps, and I haven't yet seen a ghost. I'm not sure whether I would want to see one or not. I'm not sure whether it would be fantastic or terrifying. Probably a little bit of both. But yes, I'm very much a believer.
Yeah, me too. But if you see one, you'll be okay, because I wasn't scared. It was okay.
Oh,
We just got used to living with him. He was no trouble. Although he did leave lights on sometimes, which was bad for our electric bill. I'm always interested in the journey of a published author. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience? Was it an easy ride from starting to write books starting to write stories to being a published author? What's your story?
I wouldn't say so. I started writing seriously about 10 years ago. I wanted to write my own, you know, material and explore what I could do creatively. And when I began, you know, my first attempts were truly terrible. And, you know, I can look back now and my toes will curl. I thought they were great at the time, and I read them now and they're actually terrible. And but I plugged away, and I took a fiction writing course, and, you know, they began to get a little bit better. And then I finally turned my hand to middle grade. The word count was lower, which was always helpful. You know, it seemed like an achievable goal, but mainly it was because I wanted to write for that audience, which has, you know, this wonderful imagination. You know, the cynicism that perhaps adults have hasn't crept in yet.
Yes.
You're very, very open. And you can become fully immersed in these stories. And, you know, I started submitting stories to agents. I wanted to go the traditional route, as they call it, in publishing. I think self-publishing is a fantastic avenue that's opened up for many authors. I think for a children's audience, I think, you know, you still need the support really of a publisher. You know, to reach that audience, that they're not generally going on Amazon and downloading e-stories. You know, I think they're still in the buying from bookshops and that sort of thing. So I submitted to lots of agents, and I accrued possibly hundreds of rejections, and you do need a little bit of a thick skin at times. So you know, you can begin to think, do I have anything to offer, or am I just terrible? And you know, you have to accept that agents are often looking for something very specific. Some of them will get 100 letters a day. You know, it's astonishing. So, you know, they may even just read the first 2 or 3 sentences of your very carefully crafted opening letter and decide that it's not for them. And, you know, eventually, you know, I had a letter back from an agent saying, "Oh, we like your story." And, you know, that it really did feel like I scaled a mountain. But what I didn't know and what I learned was that that's just the beginning of another big journey where you go through editorial process with the agent, where they get the book into a shape they like. Then they have to submit it to publishers, and they go through a similar process that you've just been through with agents. And then, you know, we were lucky enough to get Usborne interested in the books, and then you go through a whole editorial process with them. So it's very long, and you have to sort of accept. You have to be patient, and you have to be able to take critique. You know, and not get too upset by critiques. You know, that you have to remember that they're not criticizing you; they're trying to get this book into the best possible shape, so that they can sell it, you know. So it's very long and arduous journey. But that's just me personally. Some authors experience, you know, almost overnight success, and it's different for everybody.
I just think it's something that people who read books don't think about, and especially, you know, children just think they can go into a library and all those books are on the shelves, and they come up with, you know, something like this, which is such a polished, I can never do that, that's it, such a polished item. At the end of all that, there's so much goes into it. So thank you for that. Now, The Bewitching of Aveline is the second of your Aveline Jones books, but I'm interested also to talk a little bit about the first, as this is where we meet Aveline. So can we perhaps start there, and you'll tell us about The Haunting?
Of course. I mean, let's start at the beginning. This is the haunting of Aveline Jones, and as you say, it's where we meet Aveline, and it's a story about, you know, a young girl that goes off to stay with her rather strict aunt in an English seaside town. And, you know, as we all know, as Brits, you know, we'll go off to the seaside in the summer, and we'll get sunburnt, and we'll eat ice cream, and we'll wander on the beach, and it's fantastic. But as we also know, when you go to these places in winter, the atmosphere changes. You know, they can become quite lonely and quite eerie places once all the tourists have gone home. So I thought that would be a great setting. It's very evocative, and I thought that would be a great setting for a ghost story. So Aveline finds herself staying with her aunt, and, you know, her aunt's a little bit unsure. She's not used to having young people around, and Aveline isn't quite sure how to take her aunt. You know, she loves her, but she's a little bit intimidated by her. So they have this uneasy tension there. And she meets a boy called Harold, and in an effort to entertain herself, she's obsessed with ghost stories anyway, and she finds a secondhand book, and inside she discovers that it previously belonged to a girl called Primrose Pemberthy. And you know, she makes a casual inquiry into, you know, the previous owner, and discovers that this girl disappeared. And from then on, it's how Aveline tries to investigate what happened to the previous owner of this book, and the connection she feels to this girl. And it gets, you know, spooky. Everyone has a different level. I've read some reviews that say, you know, this is great. I've read some reviews that say, you know, parents should perhaps read it. Parents and librarians should perhaps read it first. So, you know, it depends on your tolerance level for scary stories, but it goes from there, really. And it's been a year since it's been published, and, you know, it seems to be still doing quite well. This is the season for it, of course. So
of course, yeah. So ghost stories in the first one, and then witches in the second. How do you choose settings for your story? You say that you just explained about the first one. I do know that feeling, because I've been to seaside towns when it's been out of season, and it's just it's as if the magic's gone. It's as if all the excitement's gone, and it is quite a cold and bleak place. Yeah. So that was the setting for The Haunting. The setting for the other for this one, for the Bewitching. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And are these places, are these villages real, or are they imagined?
Well, the setting for the first one was Lyme Regis. Really, I went there in winter and had a wonderful experience, and it really stuck with me. And I do believe in the right what you know adage. It does help if you, I think, if you're writing from something that you've experienced personally. The second one, after we left Rochdale, and we moved to Bristol, outside Bristol, and there's a network of small villages called the Chew Valley. And this village, Norton Wick, which is where the Bewitching is set, is an amalgamation. There's a village called Stanton Drew. There's a village called Norton Mile Reward. There's a village called Stanton Wick. And for me, coming from the north, I'd never experienced these very sort of exotic names. And so I put two of them together. And there's a village called Stanton Drew, which has a stone circle, and a stone circle features prominently in the story. So that's really where it's based. And one of the things I remember very vividly from growing up there is the sort of late summertime, when there's a smell of, you can hear tractors, and there's a smell of hay in the air, and you have these amazing warm late August evenings, and they're wonderful. And there's also maybe it's just me, probably just me, but for me there's always a slight eeriness about them as well. There's this sort of strange calm that falls over the country. It's sort of like the end of a cycle. All the crops have been gathered in, and we're buckling down and preparing to go into autumn and the colder, darker months. And there's a strange sort of tension there, which I find very interesting. So, and that's a very long-winded answer, Linda, but I hope I answered the question. I often go off on tangents and find that I haven't answered.
That's fine. And also you touched there on the thing that comes across to me in both of the books is your love of nature, and the way that you're aware of the seasons, and the way you describe the smells and the sounds that the characters are seeing, so that the reader can go along with it. So that was a really good answer. We get to know Aveline so well. Her love of books, her love of ghosts, witches, and the eerie events. So we also know that even when she's afraid, she still manages to figure out the mystery, keep herself safe, and we all have a jolly good adventure with her. Is Aveline based on anybody real? Is she based on do you base your characters on real people? Harold as well. Is Harold based on anybody?
I would say that they're both fictional. There's perhaps a little bit of my niece in Avalon, just a tiny little bit. My niece had quite a tough upbringing. She lost her mother at a young age, and I always admired that she was, she was quite a tough little thing. And so, that sort of inspired Avalon. But Avalon is, fictional from there on in. What I have done with Avalon is given her my love of ghost stories and horror, so I put that into Avalon's character, and Harold, I think, is perhaps again a fictional character, but perhaps a little bit of me. Young boys, not all young boys, of course, but in myself as a young boy can be what's the right word? We can be a little bit cocky, and we're always, making jokes of everything. And, we're a little bit foolhardy, and we're rushing to anything, without a second thought. And, without wanting to get into stereotypes, because I know, every child is different. There was a little bit of me in that, I was a bit of an idiot as a young boy. And, I tried to give that to Harold, but also imbue him with a level of charm that I don't have, but imbue him with a level of charm that would, make us like him regardless of, what he says or does.
I like him, and I like the relationship that he has with Avalon. I think it's a really good friendship that you've developed for them there. I know we discussed this earlier, but is it still okay for you to read a little bit of the book for us?
The Bewitching.
Yes, from the Bewitching, so that you can give us a taster and encourage our audience to rush out and find a copy to read at home.
Okay.
I always think it's lovely if the authors read a little bit for us, and it gets us into the story.
Okay. Well, the story begins with a quote, which is an actual quote from King James I of England and the 6th of Scotland. And it begins with his quote, which is, "Witches can raise storms and tempests in the air." And that takes us to chapter 1, which is called Stone and Glass. Aveline Jones glared at the thorny bramble lodged in the sleeve of her t-shirt. Wincing, she freed herself from its spiky grip. This was the most ridiculously overgrown garden she'd ever stepped foot in. Sighing, she took off her grimy glasses and wiped them on her t-shirt. She would be staying here for the next couple of weeks, so she supposed she'd better get used to it. Aveline's mum worked for a charity and had been so busy recently that Aveline had abandoned hopes of actually going away for a summer holiday. But then, with just enough time for a break before school started back up in September, her mum had announced that she'd booked them a cottage in the countryside, not too far from Bristol. Aveline would have preferred 2 weeks on a beach in Spain, but this was better than nothing. So while her friends were probably swimming in a perfect blue ocean somewhere, here she was, having a fight with a blackberry bush. However, there was one very good reason why Aveline was willing to risk injury to reach the end of the garden. The witch stones. There was an ancient stone circle right here in Norton Wick, the village where they were staying. The name gave Aveline the shivers. Ghosts, ghouls and witches were, of course, her specialist subject. And this creepily named stone circle had been mentioned in a book she'd read once. Now she would be able to visit it for real. Apparently, the stones had been there for thousands of years, but as far as Aveline could tell, nobody really knew why the circle had been built, though there were lots of theories. Some said it was a type of calendar, so ancient people could keep track of the seasons. Others said it was a temple where people might come and worship the gods. There were those who claimed that aliens had built it. Others said it was connected to the Druids, ancient Celtic priests who were either healers, wizards, or bloodthirsty fiends, depending on who you believed. Aveline found it all very interesting, but it was the name of these stones that really fascinated her. The book she'd read hadn't mentioned anything about witches, so why were they called the witch stones? The first step in finding the answer would be to see them for herself, and the owner of the cottage had told them that the stones were very close by, right at the end of the garden, in fact. Steeling herself for more scratches from the vindictive blackberry thorns, Aveline fought her way onwards. She would have thought someone might have tidied the place up before they'd arrived. Plants and weeds thrust themselves skywards, blocking her path at every turn. Sparrows and thrushes scuttled in the undergrowth. Huge spiders bobbed between the bushes on gossamer threads. Bees buzzed busily between the bright flowers, pollen coating their little legs like fuzzy yellow leg warmers. It felt as if she'd stepped uninvited into a private party. Following a nasty encounter with some nettles and a brief scuffle with a hawthorn bush, Aveline was making good progress when her foot hit something hard that made a clinking sound. Bending down, she rummaged around in the undergrowth. Light glinted off something in the dark soil. Intrigued, she dug her fingers into the earth until they closed on something solid. Burrowing deeper, she prized the object loose. A bottle, old by the looks of it, with a thin neck and small oval body. Its glass was green and murky and impossible to see through, even after she'd cleaned off all the clods of dirt. Straightening up, Aveline held it to the sunlight. Her fingers tingled, but that could have just been nettle stings. Inside she could see something, but it was hard to tell exactly what that something was. Just a blackish blob. All the same, it gave her the chills. A ripple of unease crept up her arms. Giving the bottle a shake, she heard a tiny rattle. Examining the neck of the bottle more closely, she saw that it had been sealed with a thick layer of wax, which might have once been red but was now the colour of tar. She tried pulling it loose, but it was hard as cement. It seemed that if she wanted to see what the bottle contained, she would probably have to smash it, something she was reluctant to do. In fact, part of her wanted to leave it well alone. But she was curious too. Old bottles with things inside them just couldn't be ignored. Holding it between finger and thumb, Aveline finally found her way to the bottom of the garden and placed it carefully at the base of the stone wall that separated their cottage from the fields beyond. A huge rhododendron bush offered some welcome shade, and so she sat down beside it to catch her breath. A few minutes here in the earthy coolness would be a welcome relief from the mugginess of the late afternoon. August had been blisteringly hot, and even though they were nearly at the end of the month, it showed no sign of cooling down. Rubbing the scratches on her arms, Aveline glanced back at the cottage. They'd arrived an hour or so ago along with a small mountain of supplies. Being in a new place felt disorientating. The view was different, the smells were different, everything was different. And she certainly never stayed anywhere quite so remote before. The village had been hard to find, tucked away down twisting, narrow lanes. With its crooked houses and weathered signposts, it felt as if the world had moved on, but forgotten to tell the residents. That had been one of the reasons why her mum had wanted to come here. She thought it would be fun for them to get away from the bustle of the big city. Well, she'd certainly got a wish, Aveline thought with a smirk. Not only had they got away from the city, but it felt like they'd stepped back in time. There were unsightly brown stains on the cottage walls. The taps dripped, the roof leaked, the window panes were cracked. The place was like an old man with creaky joints and a nasty cough. Aveline had been relieved to discover it had electricity and hot water. But it did make her wonder, when had anyone last stayed here? It felt like they were the first person to enter the place for 100 years. Feeling a little cooler now, Aveline clambered to her feet and spotted a small wooden gate in the garden wall. Just like everything else here, it seemed better days. The green paint had faded and blistered, and the lock was brown with rust. With a loud grunt, Aveline tugged the bolt free and pushed the gate open. The screech of its hinges, a sure sign that it hadn't been opened in a long time. Immediately, her eyes widened. In front of her was a ring of gigantic, moss-covered stones. She'd found them, the witch stones, almost within touching distance of where they were staying. Aveline had wondered if she might have to pay to go and see them, but here they were in all their glory, with no car parks, ticket booths, information stands, or other visitors to be seen. It felt like she stumbled into a secret place, hidden away in the green folds of the countryside. Stepping closer, Aveline sniffed the warm summer air. Her first impression was that the stones smelled of cow dung, but then there was a herd of cows milling around, so that made perfect sense. She counted 13 stones in total, double-checking to make sure. 3 stones stood upright, shaped like giant arrowheads, gigantic chunks of rock that looked as if they weighed 1,000 tons each. The other stones lay flat in the grass, their scarred grey expanses like the backs of huge whales when they'd surfaced for the briefest moment. Aveline stared with her mouth gaping, immediately fascinated by this eerie monument. It did seem a little strange that she was the only one here, especially as it was at the peak of the summer holidays. In fact, the only other living things to be seen were the cows, which wandered idly between the stones, munching on the lush summer grass while swatting away flies with their tails. She considered the situation. The stones were certainly in a remote location, and while impressive, they weren't anywhere near as grand as the giant megaliths at Stonehenge, which attracted coachloads of tourists from all over the world. Maybe it was simply because these weren't as famous. Anyway, she didn't mind one bit. It meant she would have them all to herself. Then she heard laughter. Maybe the stones did have another visitor after all. Suddenly shy, Aveline retreated back through the wooden gate and hunkered down in the foliage of the cottage garden, leaving the gate open so she could still see the stones. The day had a hazy, fuzzy feel about it now. Everything starting to soften like melting butter. The horizon shimmered. Midges danced lazily between the sun's rays. As Aveline watched with heavy eyes, a figure emerged through the haze. A girl. I thought, is that enough, Linda?
Right. Take you out. I think that, yes, that's fabulous. Thank you so much. When we were talking about the way that you write, I'll just take you back to that last bit. The day had a hazy, fuzzy feel about it. Now everything started to soften like melting butter. The horizon shimmered and midges danced lazily between the sun's rays. It's really beautiful writing. Right from the start of your reading. You are carried along in the story. You can see things that she sees. You can hear things that she hears. The way that she's pushing through the brambles. Your writing is fantastic, Phil. It's really, really good. The books are so incredibly well written that this one gave me like a breathtaking, eerie vision in my mind the whole way that I was reading. And I was instantly transported into the story. How on earth do you do that? How does a writer do that? How do you instinctively know how much to put in? Do you just sit down and plan it? Do you say, right, this is the beginning, this is the middle, this is the end? How do you know to unravel it and keep us going along so excitedly?
Trial and error. I mean, I think that the seasonal thing, you know, I do love nature, as you mentioned, and I love that about the UK is that, you know, the seasons are quite clearly delineated. We know when it's summer, we know when it's autumn, we know when it's winter, we know when it's spring. I lived in Spain briefly, and there wasn't much difference between the seasons. The temperature changed slightly, but the days were just, you know, sunny every day. And it's an amazing, beautiful country. But personally, I find that a little boring. And I looked forward to getting back to when these seasons, and I love that change we can see. So I tried to reflect that in the writing. You know, you'll write something, you'll go back and rewrite it, you'll go back and rewrite it again, you'll fiddle and fiddle and fiddle with it. I think it's a mixture of judgment. You know, I've been writing all my adult life, and you do develop a certain you know, awareness of what works and what doesn't. Reading stuff aloud to yourself often helps. You know, you can hear the rhythm of the sentences, and you can tell when something isn't quite in rhythm with the rest of it. You will get help, as I mentioned earlier. You will get editors who go, you know, you're rambling away for far too long here. You know, we need to cut this scene. And, you know, and I think also as a writer, I'm quite keen to get into the action. I have been frustrated by stories where I'm not moving forward. And I'm very conscious that, you know, younger attention spans can be short as well. So I think you need to keep pushing and drawing people forward so that they'd never feel, you know, bored or frustrated with this pace of the story. And finally, I just think that the setting, it's so important for the reader to be able to imagine themselves in a place. If you can't imagine yourself in a place, then it's hard to get immersed into a story.
Yes.
So all those things, you know, come together during a long-winded process, and much of it involves often you're banging your head against a wall, the words won't come, but you get these fleeting moments. You know, they feel great, and you just know that they're good. But those are fleeting moments. A lot of the time before that, you know, what readers won't see is that you've written sometimes hundreds of pages of rubbish. And those are the things that don't make it to the final version.
Well, I like this book because it, right from the word go, right from starting, you feel as though you're in the story, and it's a very good story. I've read quite a lot of teenage books, children's books, crossover books for work and for pleasure, and I can pick them up and I can get bored and I can put them down. But this is just so well paced. You pick up the story, you're in there with. I wanted to know the story of the stones. I wanted to know what was in that bottle. What had that bottle got to do with it? And then that comes very important later on. Just the setting that she was in when she meets the girl that she meets. I'm not going to give too much of the story away. She meets the girl that she meets. There's an air of tension. There's a lovely air of tension when she meets. Can we say we can say a name? Can we?
I think so. Yeah.
We can say when she meets Hazel. And Hazel, well, just Hazel's name, you see, again, it's part of the countryside, isn't it? It's witch hazel. It's hazel on the, you know, in the foliage of the bushes and things. It's just the whole thing just comes together. It's so wonderful. I love the way that the reader is also learning new things. We learn about witches as we go along. There are the quotes which intersperse the book, and the wonderful way that you bring all those facts of information and through the books that Harold brings. So all that comes in as well. How important is that to you as a writer?
I think that, you know, some of the quotes in the book are fictional, but the terrifying thing is that a lot of them are real. And, you know, we have this long, incredibly well documented history, dark history and terrifying history and cruel history, you know, with what went on in the superstitious old days, when, you know, people were accused of being witches and would often meet their death as a result. And I don't want to get too dark about it, but it's both fascinating and terrifying. And what interests me is that I imagine this time, you know, there was a time when we talked about whether we believe in ghosts or not, and we had a discussion about it. In the
Mm.
old days, it was just a fact. Ghosts
Mm.
exist, witches existed, monsters existed. And I find that fascinating that, you know, people would live their lives without any doubt whatsoever that there were these dark and terrible things in the night. So it's important for me to try and introduce, you know, a little bit of real history, you know, behind that. And as far as the books go, Harold, I wanted to be a bookworm. That, you know, they're both bookworms. Both characters are to a certain extent. But I wanted Harold, you know, he works in his great uncle's bookshop. He's surrounded by books. He's absorbing all these snippets of information, you know, and he loves them. And I have always loved books. And I think that when you are researching a subject and using books to research that subject, then there's something incredibly romantic and wonderful about it. The thought of dusty tomes, leafing through dusty tomes and suddenly stumbling upon the nugget of information that reveals something to you, you know, solves a mystery or puts you on the next step to solving a mystery. That whole world of research and ancient books and history, I think, is a wonderful thing. And I very much want to play my small part in encouraging younger readers to investigate books and, you know, look into them. And the cozy element of that is something I love. The smell of paper, you know, the dust motes in the air. It's intoxicating. And you know, I wanted that to be a consistent feature in these books. So I'm aware that I'm rambling again. I don't know if that answered your question, Linda.
It does. Were you an avid reader as a child then? I'm reading between the lines. You've always been an avid reader?
Yes, very much so. My mum used to read a chapter of books to us every night. And, you know, when it was time to go to bed and she'd finished a chapter on a cliffhanger, it was hard to, you know, you just didn't want to go to bed. You just wanted to hear the next bit. It was a wonderful introduction to reading. And then, you know, my dad, you know, when I started making my own choices in books and starting to read myself, my dad introduced me to C.S. Lewis. And, you know, I went through the wardrobe, as they say, into Narnia. And I just couldn't get enough of it. And, you know, my favorite thing to do was to read in bed, read scary stories in bed at night and scare myself to death. And it's funny, you know, all these years later, my favorite thing in the world is to go to bed early. It's very much, you know, I feel like an old man at times. I like to go to bed early, you know, sometimes ridiculously early. And I like to cuddle up in bed with a book, a scary book. I like to hear the rain pitter-pattering on the window and the wind blowing through the trees. And I like to scare myself. And for me, you know, I went to a place, I'm going to ramble now, just indulge me for a second. I went to a hotel recently and it has a library on the top floor and it's on the beach and it was stormy and the whole house was shaking and the pipes were rattling and, you know, you're cozied up in your comfy clothes and you've got a book and you can hear this whistling wind outside. And for me, that's one of life's greatest pleasures. And everyone should read lots of books because once you find the pleasure that's inherent in reading, you know, I don't think you'll ever go back. It's something that will stay with you for life. So to try and loop this very rambling thought back to something that makes sense, you know, it's part of the thing I wanted to convey in these books, the wonder of reading, the things it can open and reveal to you, the magic of it, you know, the coziness of it. It's all those wonderful things that I wanted to try and communicate in the books.
It's so obvious you were brought up in that environment that I was brought up in. I have open fires in this house. I'm still lucky enough to have open fires in this house. And when it is quite bleak where I live. A friend of mine was laughing, saying if everybody in the village moved out, there'd be tumbleweeds within days. You know, it is quite high up and it's quite. But I love that. I wouldn't change it. I would never buy anywhere underneath the snow line. because
Yeah.
I love the idea of, and you can hear it in the chimney. You can hear all that lovely, wonderful windy sounds up the chimney, and just to sit cross-legged with a book wrapped up in a blanket is absolutely wonderful. To get children who don't like reading, I've got dyslexia, so I didn't read a lot as a child. I didn't read much until I was an adult, and I can't. That's my soapbox. I can't help telling everybody in the world about how fabulous it is to read and to escape into these stories. And Aveline stories are just absolutely wonderful because they give you that. I don't think I like horror stories. I'm not with you on that one, but I like mysteries. I like mysteries. I like ghost stories. I like witchy stories. But I don't think I just like any. I don't think I like horror ones. I don't think I'd like that. I'd be too chicken to read those. But what was your favourite part then of writing The Bewitching of Aveline Jones? Did you have a favourite bit?
There's one scene in particular that I can't reveal because it will spoil it. But
no, we can't do that.
I very much enjoyed writing that. But generally speaking, I think with this book and the first one, I have an approach to writing which is some writers will work out what their story is about in advance. They'll plan it. So they'll, sometimes they'll work out chapter by chapter how the story progresses, and then they'll start writing it and fleshing it out. So they'll do like an infrastructure, and then they'll start fleshing it out, so to speak. My approach is like other writers, which is you just start with a single thought and you see where it takes you. And it's a very frustrating way to write. You go down lots of dead ends. You get very frustrated. Sometimes you go, I just can't make this story work. But there are moments when you suddenly have a moment of eureka, and you can see where this story is leading you, and the characters start to come alive, and the setting starts to come alive. And that for me is the most rewarding part of writing a book. And with this one, I started with a very simple thought, and that was the discovery of the bottle in the garden, which I just I read that part aloud. I always thought that if you discovered an old bottle in the garden, old bottles are they're cool anyway. That they're better than modern bottles in many ways. They had wax on them, and the glass was green and thick, and they had they're really, really cool. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if you discovered this bottle and then you discovered something very mysterious and scary about it, and where would that journey take you? And from that simple thought, the book progressed. And similarly with the first book started with, what if you bought a secondhand book and you discovered something about the previous owner that was intriguing? So my books tend to start with these very simple thoughts. And when I finally, as I say, after, many months of banging my head against the wall and having sleepless nights and getting all twisted up, when they finally start to flow and I can see the story coming together, it's a wonderful feeling. And being an author, you don't get that many wonderful feelings. There's a lot of just plowing away, sitting away, tapping away at a keyboard.
It's very lonely, isn't it? It's a very lonely occupation. Yeah.
Your confidence levels will often plummet. You think, no one will want to read this. This is terrible. And when you do get those rare moments when you can see a story start to take shape, and you think, actually, maybe this isn't too bad, then those are the best moments of writing the book. So that would be the answer. Again, another very long and rambling answer to your question, Linda.
No, I just, it's not. It fleshes out the whole. It fleshes out the whole story. I'm trying to think of things that I can give the audience. I enjoyed it so much. She meets this girl, and then who is this girl? Why is she so mysterious? She's so different to Aveline. They have this strange relationship where she is uncontrollably drawn to her, and yet all the time I'm reading it, I'm thinking she might not be what she's supposed to be. She might not be what you think. And then as the story unravels and the things that they do together. And I was thinking, oh, you shouldn't be going there, you shouldn't be doing that, and that sort of thing. It does keep you on the edge of your seat, and yet it's a very easy book to read. It is a lovely book to read because you don't get stuck anywhere in it. The whole thing unravels, and you find your page turning and wanting to know, well, who is this girl on this horse? Where's she got this horse from? Where does she live? What does she do? And then you find where she lives and you find what she does. Or is it? Oh, I just thought the whole thing was fantastic. I'm just looking at the clock now to see how much time we've got. We must mention Keith Robinson and the fantastic illustrations. How much input did you have into that?
Very little. Keith, we've become, we've never met in person, but we've become quite friendly as a result of him doing just such an amazing job with these books. And I think that Usborne found Keith, and it turns out that Keith is interested in many of the things that I am, many of the themes, folklore and nature, and he was just a perfect choice for this. And for me, what he's done is just capture the spirit and atmosphere of these books perfectly, and he's elevated them and made them, much more wonderful as a result. And aren't book covers interesting? If you wander along, through a library or through a bookshop, what will, unless you're looking for something specific, which we often are, a lot of the time you will be drawn by a cover. They're so important. And, I just think that, he's just, like I say, I couldn't have asked for someone to understand what the spirit and the atmosphere of the books and translate that into these, wonderfully intriguing illustrations. And I hope that they're eye-catching, and that, when people are wandering idly through a library, they'll look up and see. And then, what I like about the interiors is that they're very subtle touches that just take the atmosphere of a particular scene and capture it in an illustration. You could read 10 pages of a scene, or you could look at one of Keith's illustrations and you could get the same, you get the same understanding of what it's all about.
And the magpie's with you all the way through the story.
My father is to blame for that. He was the one that told me the whole, one for sorrow, two for joy. And for some reason that stuck with me. I find magpies a little bit eerie birds. The thought that they're either bestowing good luck or ill fortune on you is a thought that's always with you. And I always take my hat off when I see a single magpie. I always bid him or her good morning and wish them well,
I do this. If I see one, I've got to look around for the other one, and I've got to say, "Good morning, Mr. Magpie. How's your lady wife and all your children?" Yes.
I say, "Good morning, Mr. Magpie. What a fine fellow you are."
So I take it then you are a little bit superstitious.
Totally.
About ladders and things.
Yeah.
Now, I'm very excited to tell everyone that we can expect another Aveline Jones adventure. I believe there's a third.
There is.
Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
I can, yes. It's called The Vanishing of Aveline Jones. And, it's Aveline and Harold find themselves drawn into another very spooky mystery. And again, without wanting to give too much away, Aveline's uncle went missing many, many years ago, and nobody really knew what happened to him. And eventually her mother decides that, he won't be coming back, and they have to sell his house. And Aveline has another idea. She's convinced that somewhere in Uncle Rowan's house, which has lain undisturbed for many years.
Oh, brilliant.
Are the answers to what happened to him. And it concerns her investigation and where it takes her, and it features long barrows and dark fairy lore. Fairies, when we say the word fairy, we often think of the Tinkerbell version and these creatures with little wings that float around. But as anyone who's even casually investigated fairy lore will know, it's often very dark and very terrifying, and they can be very vengeful creatures. And I hope that hasn't given too much away, but
oh no, but it makes me want to read it now. When is it coming out?
It will be, it seems to have been, I think, again, half through accident, half through design, and half through COVID. That's 3 halves, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Originally The Haunting of Aveline Jones was scheduled for Halloween. Of course, it was the perfect time to publish it, and then The Bewitching of Aveline Jones was going to follow in spring, and then COVID happened and threw everything up, and The Bewitching actually came out the following Halloween. And then this one will be coming out, a month or so before the next Halloween. So I feel very delighted that these books have become sort of Halloween fixtures, and I love that about them. So we will have to wait until next year, but I am still working on it, so I do need a little bit of time to get it finished.
Well, I was going to ask, what's your go-to children's book for a perfect Halloween? But I can do that one for you. Perfect books for Halloween are The Haunting, The Bewitching, and The Vanishing of Aveline Jones. I'm just having a look on here to see. Now we've just got one question from someone who's watching. Sue Spencer says, how will you be spending Halloween? Do you dress up at a party, or doing research for another book, or tucked up with a good book? How will you be spending Halloween?
Hello, Sue. It's one of my favorite days of the year, and I will be spending it. What I like to do is, I've been talking about how I love cuddling up and getting cozy. I will be spending the day, or at least the evening, in front of the TV with a pizza and a pint of dark beer and a blanket. And I'll be trying to get in as many horror movies as I can before I get too tired and have to go to bed. I love the feel that, you're inside in a warm house, but outside the spirits are roaming. And, I love that sort of romantic aspect of it. So I try and terrify myself is what I'll be doing.
There is something about it that if you look out on Halloween, it's like looking out on Christmas Eve. There is something really special in the air about it.
I totally agree. I think you can feel it.
As time's going then, Phil, we have a challenge for the children. We talked about doing a challenge for the children. Is it okay to talk about that?
Yes, it is. There's 2 challenges I'd like to set to anyone that wants to accept them. One is a writing challenge and one is an art challenge. The writing challenge is to write your own scary story, and there's a couple of quick tips I can give you. I think that setting is where you set the story is very important. For example, it's very hard for a story to be scary if it takes place in a busy supermarket in the middle of the day. That's not a scary place. There are lots of people around. There's lots of bustle and noise. There's bright lights. So think about the setting. Graveyards are spooky places. Abandoned houses are spooky places. Ruined castles are spooky places. The feel is also very important. Weather can have a huge influence on the feel of the story. Again, a sunny day, it's harder to be scary on a sunny day than it is on a stormy day. We bring this place alive for us. What are we seeing? What are we hearing? What are we smelling? What are we touching? If our hand brushes through a cobweb, what does that feel like? So try and conjure up, the feel of a place. And what's at stake? What's going to happen? What's the tension in the story? In my books, Avalon has to find out something before it's too late. Yes. And often, if there's something that may happen to that character, we can feel scared because we're with this character and we're feeling scared for them. And just finally, the ending. Try and give us a good ending. It's very hard to do a good ending. If we find out that what we were reading, it was just a character having a dream, for example, that can feel very unsatisfying because nothing read was real. So try and think of a good ending, but that's very hard to do. Stephen King's the most famous horror author in the world, and he has the most terrible endings in his books. So even the master of his craft can't do it. And I hope Keith Robinson, the illustrator of the Avalon books, will forgive me for this, but There are many scenes in the two Aveline books that are illustrated, and there are many that aren't. So perhaps you could look at one of the scenes that aren't currently illustrated, and you could do your own version of it. One thing that's interesting is Harold. We never see Harold illustrated in the books. What do you think Harold looks like?
Yeah, what would Harold look like? Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
So it might be nice to do a picture of Harold or another scene in the book that you particularly enjoy. Hopefully, if you enjoy one, and try and illustrate that, or to do your own version of one of Keith's illustrations and see how they compare.
Yeah, see if you could draw magpies as well as Keith. That would be a good one.
So
Yeah.
a scary story or a scary picture.
I love the beginning of this, because we've got witches and we've got ravens and we've got Aveline. It's just a fantastic cover, and yet so simple. It's just, and of course Aveline is reading a book, which is brilliant from a librarian's point of view. Thank you very much. So if you would like to take part in Phil's challenge, please send your entries to lal@kirklees.gov.uk. That's our email address, and then we will be able to put them onto our website, so that you can have a look and see, because Phil has his own page on LAL, so we'll be able to put those on for him, and he'll be able to see what your drawings were like. I think I'd like to see somebody draw the vicar.
That would be a great one.
Yeah. Alice. It's Alice, isn't it? Yeah, the vicar. She's not a stereotypical idea of a vicar at all. I'd like to see somebody draw Alice. I think she's brilliant. So that's our lovely challenge. Now then, next I have to say thank you very much for this morning. Just take that off. Thank you very much for this morning, or sorry, for this afternoon, or as it is in Portland, Oregon, thank you for this afternoon. Are you okay to stay with us for a little while, please, while I just tell people what's coming up next?
Of course, and I'd just like to say thank you for having me, Linda. It's been great.
No, thank you for coming. Like I said right at the beginning, to get up so early and do this for us, and you've been so entertaining. You've told us so much, and I hope people listening, both teachers who want to, as I say, use this as a model for year 5, 6, or for children who want a really good story for Halloween. This is a brilliant one for under the covers with your torch. Yes, please. I'm waiting for the next one now. So thank you so much for coming along and spending time to share these books with us, because they are brilliant. Now, our next Library Adventures Live will be on the 16th of November. We're not doing them weekly anymore. We're doing them monthly. And it's at the usual time of 11, because it will be with somebody in this country, not somebody in America. So this will be with Ross Montgomery. Now, Ross has been with us before. But this time he's talking about his newest heart-stopping fantasy, which is The Chime Seekers. And you'd be interested in this one because it says step into a world of fairy tricks, and hidden danger. And the fairies in this are not good ones either. So there's an exciting story to read. That's going to be our next LAL. Our next Cosmia event is with Anthea Simmons, and that's tomorrow at 3 o'clock. I think, Kirsty, have we got an overlay for Anthea that we can pop up just to illustrate that? It's called The Burning Light, and it says Zainab is in Somaliland and Lucas is from rural Devon, which might as well be a world away. They discover a common cause, the climate crisis. So don't miss that one. That one's tomorrow. I've met Anthea before, and she's going to be really interesting, and that's tomorrow at 3 o'clock. I told you at the beginning of the show that our lovely friends at Reed's Bookshop in Holmfirth are offering a 20% discount on all of the books featured in the Cosmia Festival. So thank you, Kirsty. That's the overlay for Reed's for the bookshop. And there are 2 ways that you can, we have 2 banners as well. On the website, it can be http, there we go. That's toberead.co.uk. And you can follow them at Twitter_Holmfirth. And if you want to get your parents to take you there to choose your books, you need to go to 41 Huddersfield Road, Holmfirth. It's on the main road in Holmfirth by the library. So do go along there to that. So thank you very much for, again, to Phil, thank you very much. I can't say it enough, for coming along and talking to us. Thank you so much for writing these wonderful books for the children. And we hope to see everybody. You'll be able to go back to bed now and have a bit of a rest. Put your feet up. And the only thing left for me to say is to wish you all a very happy Halloween. Ha 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 ha. Bye, Phil, and thank you so much again. Thank you,
Linda.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Right, where's he gone? Bless him. He's gone off to put his feet up.